Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm glad to get back to your phone calls and emails shortly. But I thought I'd talk for just a moment with Frank Gaffney, who is the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy. Frank, yesterday we learned about the president's new budget proposal, which calls for less domestic spending. And if done sensibly, I think that's a good idea. And it also calls for spending more money on the military. How much good is this new budget if the Congress were to adopt it as proposed by the president? How much will it do for our national security?
Lars, I think it'll help in two important ways. One, and most obvious, is that we have been basically running the military of the United States into the ground for the past 20 years. A lot of money has been spent on it, to be sure, but most of that has gone into, combat operations and the wear and tear that's taken on the troops and veterans and so on. What we have had to do for a long time, and President Trump is trying to get it underway, is rearming our forces, modernizing their equipment, ensuring that the stuff that they have is ready to be used if need be. And these are long overdue steps. We've, I think, put our country in real jeopardy that we haven't taken them before now, quite frankly. The other important piece of this budget is, of course, that he's proposing to put something like $8.7 billion, I believe it is, towards trying to finish the job of sealing through barriers the 17 highest traffic areas that the Department of Homeland Security has identified on the southern border to complete the wall, in other words, in the places where it is most urgently needed. And that, I think, as we've talked about on many occasions, is a very, very important priority as well. So I think in these two respects, and again, what you said about defense, domestic spending is true of this stuff, too. It needs to be done properly. It needs to be done efficiently. And assuming that's the case, I think it will make a significant difference, both with respect to the national security and the homeland security.
You know, I know your expertise in national security, but Frank, I think about the way that the federal bureaucracy does things. They act as though they are the employee who's been told to do something he doesn't want to do at a badly run company, who says, well, I'm going to do this, but the boss is not going to like the result. And they engineer a way to do that. And let me give you an example. I mean, it's the old, for years I've been hearing from older reporters, now I'm one of those, saying this is the close the Washington Monument School of Government, where when you say there's a shutdown or a budget cut, you go out and close, tell all the tourists you can't go in the Washington Monument. It's closed down because of budget cuts. Now, you could cut 1,000 other things that are really non-essential, but you do the one thing that is a poke in the eye to citizens in the Capitol so that you'll get them complaining, saying, turn the money tap back on for our friends in Washington, D.C., instead of saying, for example, we spend a lot of money on Medicaid, that is health insurance for the poor, and I'm told that as many as 25% of the people on that program are working age, child-free, free of disabilities, both physical and mental, and yet they're on Medicaid, and they don't have a job. Well, as far as I'm concerned, in a country with 7 million open jobs and the lowest unemployment rate in history, if you're 25 or 30 or 35 and you don't have kids and physical disabilities or mental disabilities and you don't feel like having a job, I don't feel like paying for your free medical care.
Well, you're clearly not going to like the new way we're going to do business, which is, there aren't any jobs. And all of us are going to get paid for doing nothing. I mean, the robots and the AOC and all of this stuff. I mean, my head is exploding on this. I can't honestly figure it out what they're talking about, other than bankrupting this country and taking it down. But to your point, Lars, look, there are places unquestionably, and truthfully, there are places in the defense budget too, where economies can be made that would not materially affect, I believe, the critical missions that our government has. And often you're right, especially when you're dealing with deep state bureaucracies, they're not interested in making those kinds of economies. That's all part of the enterprise as they see it. They want to keep padding it. But here's the thing. I think what President Trump has been trying to do and why we have seen such a pushback against him, I mean, not pushback doesn't begin to describe it, an effort to destroy him, is he's a counter-revolutionary. And I wanted to commend to you and your listeners, Lars, a really terrific book that the Center for Security Policy just published this past week entitled The Red Thread, The Search for Ideological Drivers in the Anti-Trump Conspiracy. It's written by Diana West, who I think you know.
Yep.
It's just an absolutely amazing writer and researcher and extraordinary resource. And what she has uncovered really is the motivation, she argues, for why this anti-Trump conspiracy has been so aggressive in trying to stop him from getting elected in the first place and then during the transition, and then, of course, to destroy his presidency. And whether it's Jim Comey or John Brennan or Peter Strzok or Nellie Orr or, others in this mix, it appears as though, one thing they have in common, I don't know about Peter Strzok, but the others have in common is a shared experience of and affinity for the radical left, the Marxists, even the communists, for heaven's sakes. And so what I think we have to do is understand that's what's animating, unfortunately, a fair number of people inside this deep state, and it isn't going to work out well if people like Donald Trump aren't able to try to bring them to heel and change the direction that they've got the country on.
Frank, let's go back to the Pentagon for a moment. I agree with you about all of what you just said. But at the Pentagon, why is it that we do, from the Inspector General reports and others, occasionally hear about Pentagon bureaucracies that say, we know you don't need that weapon system, we're building it anyway. We know you don't need that building in, say, Kabul, Afghanistan, but we're going to build it anyway. And tens or hundreds of billions of dollars are committed to these projects when, if they were all working on one team and they said, gosh, we don't really need this building, we could buy a whole lot more body armor for our service members because the old stuff is worn out from our experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq, for example, and we'll do a lot more good for the cause of the Pentagon by spending the money there instead of here. Why don't we see bureaucrats within the Pentagon doing those kinds of things?
Well, I think you do see some. I think there are, I had the privilege of working in the Pentagon 30 years ago for President Reagan, and some of the finest professionals I've ever met were there, and I think there's still some there too. But I will tell you, Lars, one of the things that has happened to the military, uniform as well as the civilian employees of the Pentagon, is they've had 10 years of being selected and promoted, at least 8, by the likes of Barack Obama. And as a result, it's not quite the institution that it was. And again, I don't mean to mean everybody who was hired by Barack Obama, raised into higher positions in the military under him. But there is this pattern that I find very troubling, and that is that we've seen people who are certainly not on the Trump program. They're certainly not in this rebuild the military to be an effective power projection force for the national security of the United States and, defending the free world, because that's not the worldview they come from, which was Barack Obama's.
Unfortunately. Frank, thank you very much.
My pleasure as always.
Frank Gaffney is the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy.